running this partnership with the Greater Bethesda Chamber of Commerce. For those of you that have not met me before, my name is Mike Sheila, and I am the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Advantage Industries. We are very excited to say that we are now officially a silver partner with the Greater Bethesda Chamber. So thank you for Jinan for helping us get that all worked out. And one of the big things that we wanted to include in our program is this monthly education program. So this is stuff that Russell and I have expertise in. Before I go too much farther, my always awesome, my always intelligent, my always concise engineer, Russell Smith, he also represents our customer account management team. So when I go in to work with a new client, Russell makes sure that the things that I'm selling actually work. So Russell, thank you for putting together today's presentation.
You're welcome. Thanks, Mike.
And today, we wanted to dive into something that everybody has been forced to use for the last 8 months. When COVID-19 hit and everybody had to pivot on how their world of work was working, they had to embrace virtual meeting rooms. And there are so many of them. You know, we're using Zoom today for this presentation. Microsoft has Teams, Google has Hangouts, there's Blue Jeans, the list goes on and on. So we're not going to give you a definitive answer because the short version is there isn't a definitive answer. It really is a case-by-case basis. What we wanted to do today is show you some of the different features and statistics around virtual conferencing and help you make an informed decision about the one you're using and should it still be the one that you use from an expense standpoint and from a security standpoint, because that's what we're all about. We're all about providing high-level security to our business customers. So with that, Russell, why don't you launch the presentation? And I can't wait to hear what you have in store for us. I got a sneak peek, so I thought it was pretty cool.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thanks to Jinan and Courtney again for organizing this. So let me present my screen here. So I think one of the things that we've probably learned this year in 2020 because of COVID is a lot of people that hadn't used video conferencing before are using it now, and they're starting to learn the benefits. But I like to cover those just a little bit to kind of make the case for why we at Advantage use it, why we think it's a good idea, how we're using it internally. And pull in some industry metrics too. So what we see from various sources, a lot of companies are using this to reduce travel expenses. And not just the obvious airfare and hotel, but we live in DC. I think we have the second worst traffic in the country after Los Angeles. So just cutting down the time that you are traveling to visit clients and partners, not getting stuck on the Beltway is tremendously valuable. And think of all the productivity that you can gain back. I know Mike and I have felt like we're able to talk with a lot more people these days, actually, because we can go right from one conversation into another.
Yeah, Russell, that's a really good point because, again, you and I work very closely. We meet with new clients and existing clients on practically a daily basis. And in the last 8 months, I think we've been on 4 in-person meetings together to go out and talk to new prospective clients. But we have met with probably 30 or 40 businesses over that span of time and
At
had
least.
multiple meetings. Yeah, had multiple meetings with them. So this is an incredibly cost-effective, time-saving tool for us.
Yep. Infrastructure expenses are interesting because, it's one of those benefits of remote work. I think we're starting to see this, that, again, with COVID is that, hey, if we don't need an extra X square feet of office space as we add staff, they're going to work remotely. We're going to talk with them on the video each day. Another interesting thing that came up is we have a lot of people who are shifting to permanently remoting. Maybe they're moving across the country. Even one of my friends who works for a software company in California moved back to Atlanta last month, took a 10% pay cut to do so. He gets a lot more value for his dollar in Atlanta. He was working remotely anyway, so it's a win-win benefit there, and the video helps support that. So he's still able to attend his meetings every day. He's able to see his colleagues, chat with them, but it was a win for the company. They've reduced their employee expenses. And it was a win for my friend Chris, who gets to move back to be near his family. That's been interesting, and that's been accelerating this year. ADA compliance, it's good for that. Your office is ADA compliant if you're able to give your employee all the disabilities access they need remotely. That's a great tool. And then obviously COVID compliance relates into this. So, what we talked about in a webinar with the chamber over the summer, talked with Andy Stern for Andy Stern's Office Furniture, and he's talking about all the things that need to be installed in offices, the shields, the dividers. Even when you do all of that, often you're not going to have the same number of people in the office. You're going to have them spaced out. Maybe you have a third of your staff in. So you need to make sure that the other 2/3 of your staff who isn't in the office that day is able to fully participate in the business and the culture of the business. And I think video helps that a lot. And why? 87% of workers feel more connected to their colleagues, teams, and company if they have video conferencing. That's huge. That's basically everybody. And why is that? Well, my background's culture anthropology, study of human cultures and interactions. We engage in an incredible number of conversational visual cues with each other. Their expressions, things like eyebrow raises. There are all sorts of clues and context to how we want our message to go across that may be separate from the words. So a good example is sarcasm. If you write it out in text, it's hard to tell if that's sarcastic or not. If you're looking at the person, you can pretty easily tell. And we see that also kind of comes into HR issues. We feel that you can avoid HR issues by requiring video conferencing, partially for that reason. And that's why we enforce it at Advantage. When we've got to call a colleague, you're on the video with them. Also, it reduces attrition and unscheduled absences. So this has been interesting. The studies that come out that if somebody is a little bit sick, they've got a cold, they're much more likely to virtually come into work that day rather than calling out sick. They're able to do it. They're not putting their colleagues at risk. So you still have that worker. They're still happy to be doing their job, and you're not losing those hours. So there are a lot of pretty significant productivity and cost benefits from building out a virtual conferencing network.
Russell, I love this slide because so many people were forced to go virtual very quickly.
Right.
I look at our company. We made a decision on a Friday afternoon based on everything that was coming from the governor about COVID and about exposure and about risk. And the following Monday, we were all virtual. Now, we're a tech company, so we were largely prepared for that. But I know a lot of the people on this presentation today were not ready, and they found it very disruptive, and they found it very frustrating, and it was a big change. But now that we have the benefit of time, you've laid out several real reasons that continuing this is a tangible financial benefit, a tangible HR benefit. And when we engage our clients, those are the conversations that we like to have with people, using technology to make your company better, more productive, more satisfying, more generate higher revenue. And this is certainly one of those platforms. So I love this slide. Thank you.
No, I think that's right, Mike. Part of good business is about planning. Part of it is taking advantage of crises and turning them into opportunities. And I think that's what a lot of this is. And at least internally, at our own company, we're expecting that, a good portion of our staff is going to continue working remotely after we all get COVID vaccines. So we're expecting a good part, maybe they're in 2 days a week, but they're working remote the other 3 days. And we're going to see those benefits on those 3 days. So I think it's not just for the moment, but how can you use it going forward? And what are the benefits you can realize going forward in the long term?
Yeah, long sustaining benefits, agreed.
All right. However, what's holding people back? And this is a survey that came out of TechRadar, one of my favorite tech sites, and they interviewed a bunch of companies and CIOs. And a lot of it, you look at here, it's meeting rooms aren't equipped for video. Meeting rooms with video are always booked. It's too costly to make video available to everyone. Video meeting rooms are for exclusive meetings only. So the four top things are all about how do we deal with the meeting room? How do we work around that? How do we build that out? It's too expensive to set up that meeting room. Then you get things like internet constraints. That's important. Video traffic does use a lot more network traffic than, say, normal web browsing. And Mike has decades of telecom experience. And so one of the things that we are seeing right now is we do have clients that are upping their internet speed and packages, partially to deal with remote workers. Workers are uncomfortable being on video. That's a pretty normal thing. It depends on the industry too. We have a lot of programmers who are not the most extroverted people, right? To put it mildly. And so it's sort of like, hey, this is no different than being in the office. We like seeing you. We're happy to see your face, and kind of building that into the company culture. Like I said, we actually require that people do our calls whenever possible using video at our company because we feel it's important. But it is something to sort of work through on the HR side. Right, and that guys with employees are not interested in using video. So it has to be, as leaders, you have to sort of drive this. You have a lot of staff that are just going to take to it like ducks to water. You've got other staff you're going to have to pull along, just like any other technology adoption.
And Russell, you mentioned the bandwidth constraint.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a telecom sales professional for the first 15 years of my career. And anybody that is on this call that has a child in school, they know this issue, because depending on where you live and depending on what internet connection you have, that's a real challenge. And one of the big things that Russell and I are recommending to a lot of our clients now is you want to have your primary internet connection, but you want to have an inexpensive backup, right? Because it's better than not having an inexpensive backup, particularly when it comes to video conferencing. Because like Russell said, this takes to get that nice, crisp, clear picture does take more bandwidth. And we often will set our clients up so that certain internet traffic is going over one connection and some is going over another to really optimize the benefit of having those two connections. Great stuff. Love it.
Yeah. Now, but what's interesting is we also see from another survey from Forrester, we're seeing a little bit of a shift, because you look at where companies are going to be putting in upgrades, they're not talking about conference rooms. And this is even before COVID, interestingly enough. This survey was late last year. They're talking about the desktop. Conference rooms come next and kind of falls down after that. And so we're seeing a little bit of a transition, a trend here. We've gone from a few years ago hardware-centric systems. So your conference room setup would be, it's going to have special equipment, special television or projector probably at that point. And we're not talking that long ago, maybe 5 years. And it's going to be very expensive. You're going to sign with a special company that does either audio visual or just conference room deployments. It's going to cost you 10 grand, give or take, per conference room. And it's going to be a proprietary system. So they may have equipment at your office. If they do use a service, it'll work with one service. And so when you set up meetings, you're going to have to send people a specific link to whatever service you're set up with. What we've seen happening over the past few years, which has been tremendously accelerated by COVID, is a shift to software-centric systems. It's a shift to the cloud that other parts of the IT stack are doing. And what that means is that it's started in the home market. So think about FaceTime on your phone, think about Skype. So that's where these services started, the same way Apple started with the iPhone in the home market and eventually moved into business. That's the same process happening here. And so there was a lot of, how do we test the technology? We're going to test it with home users. They're going to be our guinea pigs. They're going to make sure it's stable and solid and we can support millions of people. Now we're going to start rolling it out into businesses. And the nice thing is it's cheaper. and it's hardware agnostic in most cases. So you can have, any device, any webcam brand, and you can probably use it with any software video conferencing service. You're no longer anchored to one or the other.
Russell, an interesting footnote to point out here, the hardware-centric model really was the mid-market and enterprise level businesses, right?
And small businesses really couldn't access it because it was too expensive a lot of the time.
Yeah. And so the software-centric really became a viable option. Again, think about how many people on this call today were using Zoom pre-COVID. They were at least using it casually to do things from time to time, because most of our business comes from a 50-mile radius of our office.
Right.
But every business has that exception. At Advantage, we have a client in Denver, Colorado. We have a client in Atlanta, Georgia. We have a client in New York. Right. We didn't pursue these, but when the relationships come, you have to have a viable way to engage them. And that's what the software-based systems really brought to the small to medium business market.
And we can actually see that happening. So this is kind of an interesting slide that I found, which I liked, because it has Microsoft Teams, which is now, as of a couple months ago, the market leader. This data is not complete. It only runs through April. But you can actually see here's 13 million users in July of 2019, 20 million in November of 2019. So there's a steady, pretty large increase. I mean, that's 50% in less than 6 months. So this was already happening. You look at March 12th, 32. Look at a week later, March 19th, Teams picked up 12 million additional users. By April, they're up to 75. As of June, which is the last month we have figures for, they're up to 115 million regular users. So this is tremendous growth that's been accelerated as everybody had to start working remotely. And I think we already touched on this, but why we like cloud-centric is because it's easy to try. And we'll get into some of this. Most providers that we're going to look at today, they have free plans with some restricted usage terms. So I think, Mike, you mentioned like Zoom has a free version. You can't record calls like you can with the paid business version.
Like, I think you can only have a half hour, 45 minutes, and you can only have a couple of people. But yeah, if you want to, absolutely, yeah.
Right. So you get to try before you buy, in that expression. Or they have a free evaluation period. Teams, I think it's up to 6 months. Actually, you can do a free evaluation. Low implementation cost. So it's off-the-shelf consumer-grade hardware to get going. Now, you can always go to very high-level professional gear. If you've got a big conference room and you want to put in all the bells and whistles, you can do that. But
you mean like a microphone?
Like a mic, like Mike there, with this pro-grade microphone. But you can also run out to Best Buy and grab a Logitech webcam for $40 and sign into your free account and you can be using it. So there's a lot of scalability there in terms of getting things going. Most of our clients these days, for small size conference room, they're going out to, they're buying a TV from Costco. We're getting a little computer that plugs into the back of it that controls it, and a wireless keyboard and mouse and a Logitech webcam on top, and they're good to go. And they've probably spent less than $1,000 for a conference room setup. Licensing is good because it's priced per user and per feature. So you buy what you need. You don't have to buy everything else. And no server infrastructure. We're big fans of that.
Yeah, Russell, I just want to key in on that last point really quick, because I think if we get the feedback that we get from the clients that we talk to is that licensing is very confusing. Now, many of you were probably on our last segment where we talked about the Baskin-Robbins variety of Microsoft licensing. And that's the resource that we like to bring to people, is to talk to us. We're not talking about a sales pitch or something, but contact Russell, contact me, and we'll set up time and we'll help you go through all this and really help you understand what is the feature from it. And we're not expecting you to buy from us. We're offering to be a resource and help people sort these things out.
Yeah. Easy to switch. Again, remember the hardware is vendor agnostic and plans are flexible. So a lot of companies, they may be a year term or a 2 year, but a lot of them have month by month. So don't worry that you're making a commitment for the rest of your life or the next 3 years, especially because we're in a very volatile market right now. Who is leading the market, has the widest adoption, is varying month to month. And that's going to take some time to settle out. So it's okay to make a commitment because it's not a long-term commitment. And then easy to deploy. It's so great. Webcams are so plug and play these days that we have clients that say, hey, I need to get Ann set up for video conferencing. We put a webcam in the mail, we send it to Ann, she plugs it into a USB port, and in 5 minutes we've configured her software and microphone settings. So very easy to get going, very easy to set up billing accounts, all that good stuff through a web interface. But there are so many choices.
And that's not even all of them.
I just kind of picked the market leaders. I could have probably put in dozens and dozens of companies. But I tried to filter it down to, who are the ones that we hear from the most, who are the ones that we have our clients using the most, or that we run into when meeting with our vendors.
I think that's at the root of, how does a business pick the right one? I'm willing to bet most people that are watching us today, they picked Zoom kind of by default, right? Zoom did a brilliant job of marketing
themselves. They did.
Yeah. They had a very strong following pre-COVID. And when COVID happened, people started asking, like, oh, just get a Zoom account. It's easy. And so there was a very rapid adoption, particularly of their free platform.
Yes.
And as you showed, Microsoft basically doubled their subscribership in about 60 days. And that's just staggering.
Yeah. And I've actually got another slide showing some of that growth later on. So like Mike said, the unfortunate answer is I'm not going to tell you who to pick today. But I'm going to help you start making that decision and who you should be speaking with and how you start that process. And the simple answer is interesting. This is a good thing, I think, is that most of these companies are going to do mostly the same thing. At their core, they're video conference platforms, and they are legitimate companies. They all care deeply about security. And so it really comes down at the end of the day to sort of how it interfaces with the rest of your system, how the contract's designed, how you pay for it. It comes to all these other things that are almost peripheral to the core video experience, because they've all got a pretty good core video experience. It's the features built around that is really what comes into the decision-making process. Who should be involved? And this has changed in the last couple of years. Like I said, a few years ago, you probably would have called a company that was dedicated to setting up video conferencing. Most of those companies have diversified quite a bit in the last couple of years, so they're not just doing that anymore. And part of the sort of democratization and commodification of the hardware and peripherals is why they're doing that, right? So they need to expand their services. First off, get your department team leads in. The people that are in charge of your staff, you want to consult with them and find out how are they working now, what's working for them and what isn't. So I always recommend take your existing workflows, how you currently do business, how do you translate that to remote work or video work? Once you've done that, then you start looking at, well, how can we make that better? And Mike and I talked about some of those ways already. You're going to talk with your IT department or your IT provider. If it has, we have the saying advantage, if it has a network connection, if it has an internet connection, talk to us. Because we want to protect your network, we want to protect your security. At the end of the day, if your staff has a problem with a GoToMeeting call, we're going to be the ones they're calling for help with that. One of the new ones is your office furniture provider is probably involved in this right now. So I talked about Stearns Office Furniture earlier. I know Maryland Office Interiors is doing a lot of this, where they are coming in to help you plan your conference room solution, and will help you get a conference table with data connections in it, set up a TV, set up equipment, add speakers and microphones for the center of the table, maybe help set up that high-end webcam. So they're very often involved with us in that aspect these days. Your telecom or phone provider may be a stakeholder as well. And because one of the providers we saw on our last screen was RingCentral, they're very aggressive in this area. We've got Vonage and a few others, but they're also providing video chat services. And so it may be advantageous to include those in your phone plan, or maybe it replaces your phone plan. And then, right, you may have an AV company, especially for large conference rooms where I'm talking more than 10 people. At certain sizes, you do need things like extra microphones, extra speakers throughout. And that's probably a good time to rope in an AV company who can work with your IT department, office furniture provider, et cetera, to get that set up.
And Russell, to go back to a point you made a few slides back, this conversation is really important for what's coming in the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. Russell and I talk to our clients all the time about road mapping and planning. I think at this point, we've all learned to work in the COVID environment. We may not like it, but we're working in it. And now the question is, well, how do we optimize that work environment? How do we make our employees feel more comfortable so that they're more productive? And what is the new office environment going to look like? Like Russell said, our staff is almost exclusively remote now. A handful of our key members take a turn being at the office to accept packages and such, but otherwise they don't. And even pre-COVID, I wasn't in the office most days. I would show up on Mondays because that's our meeting day. But the rest of the week I was in and out, and there were days that I wouldn't come in for 3 or 4 days at a time unless we were having a meeting. And now that we have this dynamic changed, once things do start to transition to what we had pre-COVID, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, well, heck, I don't need this great big office.
Right.
But I do need to have an office, and I do need to make sure that I do have a conference room, and I do need to make sure that I have video conferencing available. So that's a big part of the decision process that the people that are in our audience today really want to consider. And I think this slide does a great job of highlighting.
Here's the good slide. All right. So these are, now there are probably others on here. I wouldn't say this is an exhaustive list. These are the ones that we look at most when we are evaluating video conferencing platforms. First off is, what will it run on? Does it have apps on different software platforms? So, is there a Windows application? Is there a Mac application? Is there an Android or iOS application? Can you use it in a web browser? Most of them have these now, but not all of them have apps for mobile devices, and not all of the mobile device apps have full functionality. So that's something that you want to kind of do some testing with and look at. And again, talk with your IT provider or shoot us a message, and we can help answer that and provide some feedback on that. Compliance is a really big thing. So we do get clients that say, hey, can I just use the free version of Zoom for consulting with a patient? If it's a doctor's office. And the answer is that, well, the free version of Zoom is not HIPAA Act compliant, only the paid version. And you will see that. So that'll be kind of one of the differentiators. If you are under a particular compliance or security regime, we want to make sure that that product works for you. So that's something we do for our clients. So we do have clients that are defense contractors. They can use Teams. It needs to be in the Microsoft 365 Defense Department cloud if they're doing so. So it's like they can still use it. It has to be a particular variety or flavor of Teams, and so we'll help them get set up with that. software platform. So this, I think, is actually maybe the most important decision factor. And I put kind of what I see as the big three right now. So Microsoft 365, Google Business, and Slack. And these are all really kind of how you run your company and the ecosystem you're in. If you are a Microsoft shop, you're using Outlook, you've got your email and Exchange, you're using OneNote. Why wouldn't you use Microsoft Teams? Because it is perfectly integrated with all those other Microsoft Office features. And it's built right in. It syncs with your calendar. So you're getting all these ancillary benefits in terms of workflows that are very powerful. And for Teams, if you're already on an Office 365 plan, it's included for free. So, we don't need to have a Zoom subscription and pay that every month. We're already paying for our email, it's thrown in. Google Business is going to work like that too. And Slack has been deploying video conferencing. So I would say if you're using one of these sort of whole business products, it's probably a good idea to start with those folks first. That said, a lot of these companies have good integration with these other platforms. So RingCentral, I think, is probably particularly notable in terms of extra efforts that they have made to seamlessly integrate. So they'll actually seamlessly integrate with 365, Google, and Slack. And so you access your RingCentral video conferencing or your phone calls directly from any of these applications. So there are companies doing that, and that's a good thing to think about. Another part of that is analytics. So we have a call center at Advantage for our service desk, and we track all kinds of call metrics, like how long did the phone ring, how long was the person on the call, was there follow-up calls. So we're tracking all that data so we can improve our service levels. A lot of these plans, but not all of them, will provide that level of analytics for video calls as well. So you can really break down like how many video calls we're getting, who's on them, how long do they last. You can even go very granular and say, why is this person on a video call all the time, or why are they never on a video call?
Russell, you just made a really interesting point
Mhm.
that I'm guessing a lot of our audience didn't think about.
Mhm.
Our company, Advantage Industries, we have less than 30 people. So
Mhm.
we are not a large company.
Mhm.
We're not even large in the small space. We're probably like a lot of people listening today. And we're using many of these, what you would call enterprise level analytics and such, because we're a service oriented company, meaning what we sell is service, serving our clients. And I'm guessing many of you on this presentation today, that's how you're supporting your clients, that it's not so much transactional, but it's more of an ongoing. And using these platforms can give you great analytics into the success level of your business. So it's a consideration that many of you probably didn't think about. When you signed up for your video conferencing, you were just trying to get the job done, which is, I think, what just about everybody did back in March. And now you have that benefit.
Yeah, and a lot of these plans, like I know RingCentral and Slack and Google and Teams, include this analytic data in the cost of the plan. So it's not even an additional charge. It's
extra
part
value
of the package. One of the other things I think that's good to think about is public meetings, which are almost their own animal. And a lot of companies actually end up they may have one type of service for public meetings like today's webinar. They may have another type of service for internal. I think that's partially kind of where we're at right now because the market's so new and growing so fast, and that I would expect over the coming years that gradually companies are going to converge to a single platform as they go along. But everybody's testing this out a little bit. But if you do a lot of public meetings, that's a big consideration for you. How easy is it to schedule? How easy is it for my audience to use the platform? Do they have a lot of connection issues? So that's something important to evaluate if you do a lot of public events. Large meetings, how many attendees in each service plan? That's increased tremendously this year. Teams is a good example of that. I think in February you could have maybe like 50 people in a Teams meeting. Now you can have 1,500. So, and Zoom is doing the same. Everybody's building out because everybody's working remotely. So they've really expanded the scope of what's included in the plan, in the feature list.
And Russell, that's worth highlighting for a second as well, because when COVID hit, none of these platforms were ready for the influx.
Right.
And they all went through some growing pains.
Yes.
And I think the leaders, Zoom and Google and Microsoft, they've learned from that. And they've made the platforms much more dynamic now, much more easy to scale now. So if you were using a platform even 3 months ago and it really didn't feel like a good fit,
you might want to give it another look.
It's certainly worth giving it another look.
That's actually a really good point. I know, we mostly use Teams at Advantage. We do use GoToMeeting and Zoom for some things. Like I said, everybody's kind of testing out. And of course, we need to evaluate several products. And we noticed service issues with all 3 platforms in March and April that really haven't been a factor since then. So that's a very good point, Mike. Evaluation period is very key. Like I said, most have free versions for home users, or there's some kind of free trial for a period for the business version. That can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. Record keeping, and like Mike said earlier, that's almost always just with paid versions, but most services you can record meetings. We're doing that today, of course, with Zoom, and a lot of them you can transcribe meetings. So that's been added recently. I think Microsoft added that in June or July, that basically they'll have an AI tool that will take the recording of your meeting and transcribe it out. Does a pretty good job. They're starting to do translation services. I forgot to list that on here. But Microsoft, for instance, is beta testing, doing a demo test basically of translation services in a meeting with subtitles below. Very cool. So basically, if I'm speaking with somebody in another language, or I'm speaking with somebody who may be deaf, it will give me a subtitle on the bottom of what they're saying. And I would expect we'll be seeing that sometime next year with wide adoption. It's moving very quickly. And then cost. So first off, if it's already included in your platform, like you're already on 365, that's great. That's one more cost that you don't have to worry about. There are add-ons with enhanced functionality. And those may have additional costs, and you want to factor that into your consideration. You want to see if it's a per user or company-wide pricing, depending on how you're organized. One may put you ahead. And then contract terms, of course. A lot of these plans have month-by-month options. Some of them will have very nice discounts for a longer plan. Personally, I probably wouldn't sign anything. I wouldn't sign anything longer than 3 years, for sure. You might even want to go less than that, simply because the market is changing so fast right now. So yes, here's just kind of a summary of our general recommendations. Just a reminder. So yeah, if you're already in a product stack, go with that stack. Remember that you're not committing forever. This is not giving up your firstborn child or anything. So don't be afraid to try something out and change your mind. Next year. It's okay. It's not that hard to implement. It's not that hard to get rolling. The biggest factor is training your clients. Most of them work the same. Everybody's got that same little icon for the webcam. Everybody's got that same little icon for the microphone. So you can pick it up pretty quickly. Let's see. Again, like I said, it's okay to maybe try out a couple different platforms for different roles, partially as an evaluation. And then follow your peers. So it is interesting. We see, in terms of who's using what software, a good example is business email. In the DC market, and probably on the East Coast, it's massively Microsoft dominated. In Silicon Valley, in California, tends to be Google dominated. And it will vary by industry and region. So one of the things that I recommend is, hey, if 90% of your clients are using Teams or Google or Zoom, might be good to kind of follow their lead, because that may be where your industry is going.
Russell, you alluded to this a few minutes ago, but and Janan had actually asked us about this in the pre-show. But you can have a personal Skype account. You can have a personal Zoom account,
right?
Because this is still going to be a part of our world. I was telling Janan that I'm having a pre-Thanksgiving Zoom meeting with my family.
Raise your hand if you're organizing that. I am too.
Yeah. So I'm doing that Wednesday night, but I'm going to get to see my family in New York, and we're going to share some pie and a couple of adult beverages, and because we can't be together. Right. So recognize that there are lots of great personal uses for these platforms as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a lot of them, like Mike said, there is there's a business version and a personal version. And the functionality is very similar. In a lot of cases, like Microsoft, it's Teams for Business, it's Skype for Home. But, you can take advantage of that. You can use that for business. We always recommend the business versions, partially because you as the business owner own that account in those records.
And security.
So you need to go back and look at a transcript as something you own, that you have full control over that, where if your employees are using personal accounts, they can walk away with them. And you can't go back and look at that stuff. So that's important. And where we were heading. So we were talking about market growth. So this is actually only through June. I think we're waiting on third quarter data still from most of these companies. But basically starting all these companies at where were they on February 17th of this year, and how much have they grown since then? So we see the big ones that I kind of want to flag are Microsoft Teams, which has become the market leader as the year went on. And then Zoom is pretty close behind, but Microsoft Teams has seen an almost 900% increase in the number of users between February and June. But that's pretty across the board. Skype, you see very low because they've actually transitioned that to Teams. So these are sort of legacy accounts that are going on, but you can actually increase those Teams numbers a little bit. Zoom those two are really the big companies in the market. I know as of last year, before COVID hit, Zoom and Teams accounted for about 45% of the overall market. So they really dominate. And those, I think, are probably the ones to watch. But we also see Cisco WebEx growing nicely, GoToMeeting, Slack. This slide doesn't include Google, but they're a big player too, of course. And so we expect to see this growth continuing. The market is growing very fast. It's going to be a $20 billion market by 2024. We're going to see some additional features, we think, coming down the pipe too. So companies are testing things like facial recognition to validate who should be allowed into a meeting, which is very interesting. My sister is a teacher out in Colorado, a high school teacher, and she's been teaching remotely this semester. Day one, it was a disaster. Because you did not have to sign in. There was no password. So random people who weren't in her class were able to come in. They didn't have to show their faces. People were saying all kinds of things, and it was this whole discipline issue. And so by the next day, the entire school district had implemented several rules in their Zoom meetings that you have to have your webcam on to join. You have to have a password and log in. So we're going to see that kind of enhanced security rolling out, as we've learned. I mean, everybody's learning right now what works and what can be improved. More powerful analytics. I think we're going to start seeing some video chat bots, which is weird, but probably the way the nature of the market is going. So think about going to a website right now, and you get that little, hey, this is Andrea or Bob, can I help you? Those are going to start being videos. And if you've seen a lot of the deep fake videos that are going around, we can simulate faces very well right now. So I would expect that that's going to be something we're seeing. And not sure the implications of that yet, but it's coming. I think we're going to see a lot of video for business to consumer markets too. So we're really focusing on today on communication within your company and maybe with companies that you work with. But I think a lot of customer service and support is transitioning rapidly this year to video. Right now, a lot of times people are using a consumer platform, like maybe you get a client that calls, there's a problem with their air conditioner, maybe they'll get on FaceTime with you to show you what they're looking at. I think we're going to transition to more company-run platforms for that. Amazon is already doing this in terms of their Kindle Fire support. So when you have, because it has a built-in webcam, so if you have a support issue with your Kindle Fire, you get a video call with an Amazon support representative. And I think that's going to be built out a lot. Augmented reality, I think, is also going to be very interesting. So, we have different backgrounds right now that we can apply, and all the major services do that. They've been adding them this year. Zoom was one of the first, but most of the other players have followed, so you can do your own background. We're probably at some point very soon have your own virtual environments that you're meeting in. So the earliest, again, stages of that is the Stadium View that like Microsoft is doing, where you have your meeting with your company, you may have 20 people, and it looks like you're in movie theater seats, so you can see everybody at once. I think eventually we're going to have a 3D environment that you're sort of sitting in. It's a conference room or whatever, and that'll be part of that. Or think about it for our architect clients, or we have clients that are manufacturers. Eventually, within the next few years, they'll probably be able to be in a video call with you and say, hey, let me pull up the CAD file of this widget that we're making. And so they'll pull it up and it'll be in front of you in the meeting with them standing holding it with, here's the model of the equipment that we're making for you. Let me zoom in and show you what that looks like. So there are going to be some very cool things, and the pace of technology is so fast, this is not going to be that many years off before we start seeing some of these things. All right.
Very cool.
That's what I got.
Russell, thank you for bringing us just an avalanche of fantastic information. And we will make this presentation available to everybody that participated today. And equally important, I said this earlier, but Russell and I are here as a resource to members of the Greater Bethesda Chamber of Commerce. We want you to feel comfortable contacting us and knowing that you're not going to get a sales pitch, but rather you're going to get a couple people that want to talk through what's important for you and help you make a decision, whether you buy from us or not.
Right.
That's our plan. That's our partnership. So Courtney, Janan, thank you so much for having us on today.
Thank you. And there's a question. Yes, Ashley, I'm going to send the slides to everyone from my email after this. So you'll get those.
Russell and Mike, that was great. It was
thank you so much. And we're looking forward to the next one next month. It'll be on December 16th at the same time. So keep a lookout for the details on that. It'll be on our website. So
yeah, low cost ways to really maximize your cybersecurity for the small business owner.
We'll give you some more specific answers on that stuff too.
Yeah, we're going to give you concise, actionable content that you can implement almost immediately after seeing the webinar. It's going to be great.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. And thanks to everyone who joined us today.
We'll see you next month.
Yep. See you all next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.